Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online. Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
I'm Dan Rundy. I hold the Schreier Chair here at CSIS. I'm really grateful that you would join us today for our report launch on sustainable infrastructure in the Amazon, connecting environmental preservation with governance, security, and economic development. This is a really important report. We're really proud of the work that we've done. I want to thank, in particular, Romina Bandura and Shannon McCune, as well as the other folks at CSIS who've made this possible. We have a main report, it's on our website, and 3 country case studies that I encourage you to read. We've interviewed over 120 people and looked at everything in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And we've convened a variety of experts over a year-long period. So we've done this over this research project has explored how deforestation in the Amazon basin is linked with weak governance, insecurity and conflict, and inadequate infrastructure planning in the region. Our findings reveal that these countries have structural challenges that enable the drivers of deforestation to thrive. There are 9 countries in the Amazon basin. It's not just Brazil. There are 8 other countries that share the Amazon with Brazil. As a result, deforestation in the Amazon cannot be solely circumscribed as an environmental phenomenon. It is the inevitable outcome of a confluence of security, economic, and governance issues. Introducing infrastructure development into this existing complex landscape can increase the risk to the ecosystem and the people who inhabit it. At the same time, it's very likely the infrastructure is going to get developed in this large region. The trick is to do it in a responsible, careful way. It is possible. Through this project, we connected the non-environmental issues with the shrinking of the Amazon ecosystem. And we're hoping to reach a wider audience by engaging actors beyond the environmental community on this pressing issue. And we reached out to a wider audience. We're really grateful to the Moore Foundation who made possible this report. And I want to welcome Avesita Chichon from the Moore Foundation, who's going to make 5 minutes of introductory remarks to help set the scene. Avesita, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dan, very much, and the CSIS team for the invitation, and also for the impeccable work on this study. I also would like to thank Christina McNeff from our Moore Foundation team, who worked closely with CSIS in the development of this report. Today, I'd like to speak to you about 3 different things very briefly. I know I only have a few minutes. First, I want to say why the Amazon. Second, why the study? And third, how do we work together to change the crisis in the Amazon? So why the Amazon? The Moore Foundation was established in 2001. And since the beginning, there was an important interest, an important concern about the fate of the Amazon. We focus on universal values, particularly on the pursuit of science and good evidence for environmental conservation. So we're interested in connectivity in the Amazon. We're interested in democracy and participation. It has to be social, there has to be social relevance. And we are also interested in science and analysis, in data-driven decision-making. The Amazon has many superlatives. We are focused there because of the high biodiversity it contains. It is really big. It is about the size of the continental continuous USA. And it not only has high biodiversity in mammals, birds, etc., but it also has high biodiversity, high cultural diversity. There are between 350, nearly 400 different ethnic groups, and even some of them are uncontacted in the forests of the Amazon. So when we talk about the Amazon, then we're not just talking about natural areas that are large, but also natural areas that may have been transformed in many centuries ago, but its original inhabitants. And, for example, when we think about indigenous groups in the Amazon, we know that it is important to consider them in the portfolio of conservation areas. Right now, thanks to the work of many of our partners, nearly 50% of the Amazon is under some sort of protection, be it protected areas from sustainable use to strict protection, or indigenous territories. About a quarter of the Amazon is under indigenous control. And indigenous people are also the most vulnerable in the Amazon, and they could suffer the most because of the impact of infrastructure development. Understood in terms of roads and waterways for transportation of people and commodities, or also infrastructure development in development for energy. The Amazon is undergoing rapid change because of the expansion of agriculture, cattle ranching, mining, logging, and other economic activities. And all these activities are, in a sense, facilitated by infrastructure development. So, second, why the study? Precisely because infrastructure development opens up the Amazon for other economic types of use. At the Moore Foundation in 2017, we launched a specific strategy to understand why infrastructure is so important in the Amazon. What we heard from our partners in the field and from decision makers and others is that that there is some sort of dichotomy of development and conservation of the environment. So we want to make sure that we understand that this shouldn't be the case in the Amazon. Development is needed, but good development is the thing we need. Roads, for example, in the Amazon cost an average of $1 million per kilometer. Why is that? We need to understand that this shouldn't be the case. So given this urgency, we asked CSIS to help us make sense of these two very different perspectives, development and conservation in that sense. So the title of this report is Sustainable Infrastructure in the Amazon. And I have to confess that for me, sustainability focuses on renewable resources, and we cannot think of infrastructure as renewable. But yes, we can think of infrastructure, as the report says, based on the three pillars of what sustainability is about: economic issues, social issues, and environmental issues. And this report, the way I see it, focuses on that part that is the weakest when we understand sustainability, which is how we look at equity, social equity, security, conflict, and all these issues that are important to achieve true sustainability. So Robina will. So finally, what is this? What do we do, right? Romina will tell us about her findings in a little bit, but one thing has to be highlighted throughout, that this dichotomy between environmental conservation and development is false, and we need to find a way out of that. So our foundation has been supporting partners for a long time on these issues, but we do need to focus more on the aspects that have not been very in front of us, or we have not tackled them in a very direct way. And that has to do with building good governance, looking at anti-corruption seriously, decentralization, and also the economic viability of the projects that are to be proposed in the Amazon. I hope that this, I and my team and we all hope that the CSIS report will bring this new perspective into light, and looking firstly at collaboration. That is key for getting out of this false dichotomy, and also seeing the Amazon in a good way, seeing the Amazon as a complex system that is made up of forests, rivers, and people that are concerned with its viability for the long term. Thank you very much, and I turn it over to Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Avesita. I really want to just thank you again, and I want to thank Christina McNeff for you all entrusting us with this work. I think the product is a triumph, and we're really looking forward to engaging our friends in various governments in the region and engaging on this. I think having interviewed 120 people and looked at everything in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, looked at every single thing in the literature on this, and then being able to convene our friends and experts like the folks that'll be joining this panel, we're really anxious to engage because I think we've got something important to say and provide some different insights. So thank you to the Moore Foundation for this. So Romina, I'm anxious for you to thank you for leading this effort. You're a senior fellow here at CSIS. You've led some really important groundbreaking work on any number of different issues, whether it's in development finance, in the future of work, but now this project on the Amazon and thinking and broadening the lens to think about the Amazon as a multi-dimensional challenge. I think what you've done is a real triumph here. I really look forward to you sharing some of the findings so that it sets the stage for the panel discussion. Over to you, Romina.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Christina and Avesita. I must say that this project has been one of the most difficult projects that I've done through the years, because when we started, it was like, okay, sustainable infrastructure. And then, you talk about the Amazon, and, as Avesita mentioned, this is not any country or any region. It's a very complex region. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, our findings in a minute. But I wanted to, highlight that this is, a special place. And, a lot of the problems here are magnified because, as it was mentioned, we're not just dealing with environmental issues, but we have people and we have natural resources that want to be exploited. So it's like a confluence of things. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope the presentation is short. Otherwise, I'm going to be muted as, in the first presidential election should have been. So just a minute. You share my screen. Can you see it? Okay. So I'm going to just give you a brief overview of the report. As Dan mentioned, the report is mainly based on 3 country case studies that we conducted: Brazil, Peru, and Colombia. The report is in English, and the case studies are in English, but we're going to release the Portuguese and Spanish versions this week. So what is this report about? As Dan mentioned, when we discuss the Amazon's development, a lot of people center the discussion about the environmental damage that is taking place, and rightly so, because, deforestation, biodiversity loss, and water pollution are happening, since the 1970s. But this ecosystem degradation is not just an environmental problem. It's really a symptom of other challenges that are happening in the region. And this includes high levels of poverty, lack of meaningful economic opportunities for people, human insecurity, which is exploited by illegal groups, mafias, weak governance, and inadequate infrastructure planning. These problems figure less prominently in the discourse of the Amazon, but if these issues are not included in our discussion, we will literally not be seeing the forest for the trees. Now, our report wants to reach, I know that environmentalists and conservation groups, are well aware of these issues, but we, as Dan mentioned, wanted to reach a wider audience, other actors, and of course here in the United States. And that's why, we have an interesting map. This map that is on the slide, it just shows you what Avesita was saying, for the US audience to know that, when we talk about the Amazon, it's an immense territory. And so it's easy, again, for for me to be here in Washington and do this research and talk about the problems, but the region is so vast with so many complexities, and it's not an easy task. But we want to be optimistic, where a report has although we point out the challenges, we believe that there's an opportunity to develop the Amazon in a sustainable way, and that's the key word, in a sustainable way. And infrastructure, quality infrastructure, can accompany that process. However, if we just put infrastructure in there without really tackling the structural challenges in the region, it's going to be wasted, and these community risks and environmental risks will be exacerbated. So next slide. One thing that maybe the US audience doesn't know much about the Amazon. Yes, when you talk to people, they equate the Amazon with the trees, with the birds, with the waterways. Of course, the Amazon basin has the world's largest biodiversity. It's the largest rainforest. It hosts 20% of the world's freshwater resources, and it serves as the air conditioning of the world, storing carbon and regulating rainfall and climate patterns in the region and in the world. But what people don't, maybe are not so aware, is that the Amazon has significant economic resources in terms of waterways and fisheries, mineral deposits such as gold, copper, and nickel, oil and gas reserves, forestry products, and medicinal plants. And at the same time, this is an area that is inhabited by 35 million people, mostly in urban settings, small cities. They're not, sprawling cities, but it's mostly urbanized. And as Avesita had mentioned, there are like 350 different indigenous groups. And unfortunately, the people, in this region lag behind their respective countries in terms of socioeconomic development. So this confluence of environmental assets, economic resources, and people creates challenges and also opportunities for the development of the Amazon. The challenges are, well studied. There's significant environmental damage taking place in the Amazon. But again, it's not just an environmental phenomena. It has three drivers. Again, the meaningful economic opportunities are lacking. There is, people when they are drawn to, they don't have good jobs and good services, they are exploited by other groups. There's a lot of illegal activity going on in the Amazon. This together with weak governance and state presence, especially at the subnational level, lets these economic activities to thrive. And then, if you couple that with infrastructure deficiencies in infrastructure planning and execution, it creates, a very negative concoction. However, there is hope, and there is, the positive news about the Amazon is that 80% of the forest is still standing, and we have to thrive to keep that and increase it, of course. Countries do have, laws, regulations, and policies in place to protect the Amazon. However, enforcement is a key challenge. And, these countries have, a lot of scholars, scientists, policymakers, wise people that they have the knowledge to conserve the Amazon and to develop it in a sustainable way. There are many creative ideas for developing the Amazon in a sustainable way. For example, the bioeconomy, ecotourism, things like that, when you talk to people on the ground, there have been very good plans put forward. So there is, our report does not develop a new plan. There's already, a lot of good plans out there. And, and thank you for, the development finance institutions and international organizations and fora such as OECD and G20, which have developed in the last 10 years this concept of sustainable infrastructure principles or quality infrastructure, which take into account, how do we plan infrastructure that, of course, has an economic return, but that takes care of environmental risks, community risk, and institutional risks. I know Tomas will talk about this in a minute. And then, there are companies and investors are also waking up to the fact that, when we make investments, especially in a region like the Amazon, we don't want to be exploiting the rainforest and creating all these negative externalities. It's not good business. And so investors and are waking up to the fact that they want to invest in the Amazon, but they want to do it in a respectful, careful way. Consumers, I'm not a millennial, but millennials are savvy consumers, and when you talk to them, nobody wants to buy a product that has, or eat meat that has been sourced from a deforested area, or buy a product that is not, that has created community displacement. So consumers and citizens are waking up to the fact that we need to create a viable path in the region. And countries, regional cooperation is an opportunity. Recently, there has been, the Leticia Pact, which was more of like a political pronunciation, but the Leticia Pact between Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and others has to be operationalized in the future, so that that these countries have to come up and with a vision for the Amazon, a vision of sustainable development. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit quickly about the report. We have 3 chapters, one that deals with insecurity, the one that deals with weak governance and deficiencies in infrastructure planning, and then we have some conclusions. So first chapter, let me just say 1 minute. It was, the Amazon began its development in the 1960s and 70s. There was this notion that, the military had this notion that we needed to protect the forest from foreign actors. Yet, illegal activities and climate change are the significant threats that are unbalancing destabilizing the region today. So we have insecurity in the Amazon. It takes 3 related forms. First, environmental security. Deforestation contributes to biodiversity loss and climate change. And second, illegal economic activities in the region have fueled personal and community insecurity. And there's recurrent instances of land grabbing, colonization, and violence. And in some cases, deforestation has displaced communities. Thirdly, the inhabitants of the Amazon face economic and health security due to a combination of factors. There's lack of meaningful jobs, insufficient healthcare, as witnessed by the COVID crisis. Other public services are missing: water, sanitation, education. There's mercury contamination from illegal gold mining, and the proliferation of vector-borne diseases such as malaria and dengue, heightened by the loss of forest cover. Second, security challenges. The second chapter, these security challenges are magnified by a series of weak governance structures and the rule of law that enable even more deforestation in the region and allow insecurity to thrive. So what are some of these weak governance that we uncovered? First, land governance in the Amazon is weak. And what do we mean by that? In general, Amazon countries have inadequate land registries and disorderly titling processes, as well as opaque systems for granting different types of economic concessions. At the same time, a large amount of land in the Amazon remains undesignated, no man's land, and it's insufficiently monitored. And so this creates opportunities for settlers to invade and expand their activities, leading to further deforestation and social conflict. Second, local governments often lack budgetary and human resources, technical capacity, and sometimes political will to address competing problems. And a third governance challenge has to do with transparency and corruption in government practice. So taken together, these governance challenges provide an avenue for environmental exploitation and allow illegal activities to flourish. Third, infrastructure development. We're not against infrastructure development. Infrastructure has the potential to generate economic and social gains. It can facilitate human mobility, connect products to markets, generate jobs, improve communications. Infrastructure provides inroads for security forces to disrupt criminal networks and increase access to medical care, potable water, education in rural areas. However, the problem in the Amazon is that countries have developed pipelines that are basically meeting the needs of big groups, and many of these projects have been mega projects, large scale hydropower and road networks. And these kind of projects have had dubious economic returns and have not really provided benefits for the lingering communities, and really have provided a lot of environmental degradation and spurred social conflict. So the challenge is that infrastructure planning process has been deficient. Projects have been pushed forward without a careful analysis of long-term growth strategies, infrastructure designs, or any alternative options. So what do we say as conclusions in the report? We have laid out 5 principles for an integrated sustainable development strategy in the Amazon. And these 5 principles are mainly, first of all, the not so sexy stuff is, and going back to basics, is we need to increase the focus on good governance, transparency, and anti-corruption efforts, especially at the subnational level. And the international community can help with that. The DFIs and we have OECD principles on anti-bribery and corruption. These can be used, in the Amazon. Second, countries need to invest in security forces in the Amazon. I mean, we need more presence of the military and police but to combat growing organized crime, especially around cocaine production and illegal gold mining. As you know, Brazil has become the second largest consumer of cocaine in the world after the United States. And, the neighboring countries are the largest producers, and illegal gold mining has, skyrocketed. So these are really challenges that need to be tackled, and security is needed. And these, there's a lot of groups that exploit vulnerable populations into these activities. Third, security cannot go just alone. So we need a process where security efforts are linked to economic plans. And so economic opportunities are needed. We need to develop sustainable value chains that create economic alternatives that are based on a living forest model, as opposed to an extractive slashing and burning model. And, this is a concept a little bit like what Colombia is doing, is taking an approach to security is multidimensional. So combining, environment with economics, with security and governance through their Zonas Futuros program. So we need to embed security in a more, in economics and in social development. And fourth, regarding infrastructure, governments should focus on creating a pipeline of sustainable infrastructure projects, which takes into account environmental and social impacts. So the process for selecting infrastructure projects need to be strengthened so that, first of all, investments make economic sense and minimize environmental and social risks. 2, Projects are evaluated as part of a broader strategy, of a broader strategic development framework in conjunction with other projects for in the region. So, projects need to be evaluated with other projects as a whole. 3, communities need to be brought in early on in the discussion and not just, after the project has been decided. So they need to be part of the process of decision making. And 4, different project alternatives need to be presented beforehand so that the best designs are pursued. Environmental and social impact should also be approached not only as risks to be mitigated, but as opportunities for new business and local wealth generation, for example, through the issuance of green or sustainable bonds to finance projects in the Amazon. And the last thing I'm going to say is on regional cooperation initiatives. Countries need to adopt, I think, a more unified vision of development for the basin, especially in terms of infrastructure projects. And, what we see is the Leticia Pact is a very good first step. We propose appointing, an Amazon SAR, an official that will be well received across countries who would tackle deforestation through a multidimensional whole of government approach. So this is all I'm going to say. Thank you. And we have a panel now that Dan will moderate. Dan, over to you.
Romina, thanks again. Congratulations. This is a triumph of a report. I really congratulate you and Shannon and your colleagues. I think this is really great. I'm really looking forward to working with you as we engage Congress, the U.S. executive branch, but also our friends in government and out of government in the region, because I think there's a lot of important insights that, we want to bring to the conversation. This is really great stuff. The work of think tanks is not solitary work. For example, Romina and her team interviewed over 100 people, 120 people in at least more than 4 countries. And we're really, really fortunate to have 3 fabulous friends of CSIS, really thoughtful experts who really helped us along the way and gave a lot of their time and expertise. I'm so appreciative to the 3 panelists. And I'm very, very grateful that we're able to you guys agreed to be on to join me today. We're going to unpack from several different perspectives what we talked about here. We've got, I'm grateful, I've got my friend Tomas Serabrisky, who's a principal economic advisor to the Infrastructure and Energy Department at the Inter-American Development Bank. He is a very serious economist looking at the intersection of infrastructure and economics. He's my go-to person when I look at infrastructure issues. He's been a great partner to CSIS. He was really instrumental in us having success with a high-level bipartisan commission that we did on the future of global infrastructure. So Tomas is the person I look to when I think about the future of global infrastructure, and especially in the region. Thank you, Tomas, for being here. We have Daniela Gomez Pinto, who's the head of the local development program at the Center for Sustainability Studies at the Getulio Vargas Foundation, the most prestigious research institution in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And she's brings a lot of expertise to this conversation. I so appreciate you, Daniela, being with us. I'm thrilled. And then, of course, my good friend, Juan Cruz, who's a senior advisor at CSIS. He had a really fabulous career in government, spent more than 30 years in government. Now, he started his career as an intern at CSIS in the 80s, which I'm always really proud to talk about. Then he wanted to have a great role in government. And then he's agreed to come back and give us some of his time helping us at CSIS. And it's been a thrill. I'm so grateful to the 3 of you. And this is just great. So, Tomas, let me just start with you first on the report. I've got several questions for each of you, but let me start with the following, which is, so Tomas, IDB has developed a very sound framework on sustainable infrastructure. We've just talked about this. You've heard this, we've put on the table by the previous speakers. Can you talk about this framework and what is the progress on operationalizing sustainable development frameworks across the MDBs? And how does that play into this report? Because I think it's relevant to the report that we're talking about here.
Dan, thanks. Good morning, everybody. let me start by congratulating you, Romina, Shannon, and the rest of the team for a fantastic report. It's really, really useful. I recommend all the audience to read it. It's a very rich report, worth reading. So going to your question, the IDB published in 2019 a report, what we call IDB framework, this attributes for sustainable infrastructure, and it argues that sustainable infrastructure has 4 main pillars: environmental, social, economic, and institutional/governance. And why? Because it's usually the case that sustainable infrastructure is associated only with environmental and social safeguards, as has been traditionally the focus of even of these institutions. And the safeguards are already now, we can say, well established in most MDB's policies that go through, constant upgrading and improvement. But the challenge is that safeguards have been designed to implement projects in the right way, as Romina pointed out in her presentation. But the idea of a sustainable infrastructure framework is to help countries pick the right projects. So this goes beyond doing the project right, but is picking the right projects. And this implies that we need much better upstream planning capacity. So that's why you need a lot of planning, cost-benefit evaluation, and then coming up with a development plan with a set of projects, well-prepared projects with enough resources for pre-investment. So what's the progress of the sustainable infrastructure principles across MDBs? And I think we have to be optimistic. There are good news. The MDBs created a few years ago what is called the Infrastructure Collaboration Platform. It's a working group where was created to interact with the G20, and a set of aligned set of indicators was published last month. So the idea, we're all working very hard to have a common set of sustainable infrastructure indicators, because we have to say that the idea of sustainable infrastructure evolved in different ways. So we all have different instruments, and we must come together and produce a set of common indicators. That's the way forward. And the good news is that sustainable infrastructure has been prioritized by the G20, at least in the last 4 or 5 years. And the Italian presidency highlighted that it will be a top priority. But, unfortunately, we are still not there. We have to work, all the MDBs, to produce a common set, to give certainty, clarity to investors out there, to say, hey, these are the benchmarks to comply with when we invest in infrastructure, and how to operationalize sustainable infrastructure. I guess the answer is not easy. We need to work internally in the MDBs, but there is a problem. We need to work on the demand side, what we call demand side of sustainable infrastructure, and that is that countries need to be fully convinced about the need to invest and pursue sustainability when they invest in infrastructure. Being, on the MDB side, what we are doing, in particular in the Inter-American Development Bank, is reviewing how we calculate cost-benefit analysis for sustainable infrastructure, because it's very difficult. Until now, it's been, in the project cycle, difficult to justify this delta of investment to come up with sustainable infrastructure, at least on the resiliency side. And our weak dimension has been on proving that the benefits are there. But so we need to really change and update the way we estimate the benefits of projects.
Okay, so Tomas, so in your mind, how does this apply to the Amazon? So I know that and what is the role of the MDBs in the context of the Amazon conversation?
I would say that, when everybody talks about refers to the MDBs is financing. And I would say that financing is just only a part of it. It's always important. But in my view, the role of the MDBs is on sharing knowledge and helping countries strengthening planning. And that was pointed out many times by Romina. We can help countries come up with tools to show stakeholders, all stakeholders in the country, that goes from politicians, developers, project sponsors, and of course communities involved, that sustainable infrastructure is the only way forward. So MDBs can play the role somehow of an honest broker that put all the options on the table, and this implies valuing all the options, which sometimes include hard trade-offs, right? And then leave the governments to take the decision. Unfortunately, as I'm sure we'll all agree, Latin America is not the best region when it comes to planning. So we have to strengthen and upstream planning to produce a development plan and a set of projects that are the result of a consensus building exercise.
So I don't think everybody who's listening to this conversation understands the power and influence of MDBs. And I think, Tomas, you've touched on it, not only in terms of the money, but in terms of the analytics, the convening power, and it is a trusted partner. Brazil is a very large shareholder. I think it owns about 10% of the shares of the Inter-American Development Bank. It's one of the largest shareholders of the Inter-American Development Bank. It's a significant shareholder of the World Bank. These institutions are trusted and have an enormous amount of influence with governments, regardless of political color of the government, the gobierno de turno, to use the Spanish term, doesn't matter. These institutions have enormous influence. In Washington, we don't think of them in this way. And if you've not been in government before, or if you've been only in civil society, you only think these institutions have money. That's not the totality of where they have, that's capacity building that you're talking about, training, capacity building, convening power, analytics, helping broaden the aperture. These are all things that the MDBs can do. And the IDB in particular is particularly trusted in the region. And all of the members in the Amazon basin are shareholders of the IDB. And all the members in the Amazon basin are shareholders of the World Bank. So those are appropriate and interesting opportunities to, there's a big role.
Yeah, there is one additionally to just the role of international coordination and be an agent of that could facilitate dialogue. That was also pointed out in Romina's presentation. The addition of because it goes beyond the MDBs, or the IDB in this case can be instrumental in fostering dialogue, given the multidimensional challenge that go well.
So this is a good pivot for me to bring Daniela into this conversation. So Daniela, the International Finance Corporation, which is the development finance institution of the World Bank and a very prominent and influential organization that is part of the World Bank Group, but is a huge organization on its own, partnered with FGV, your organization, to develop very comprehensive guidelines on large infrastructure projects in the Amazon. And so convened stakeholders, a little bit to Tomas's point, around this. Can you give us an overview of these guidelines, and how do you see these guidelines being applied in practice, Daniela? Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I just want to congratulate CSIS for the comprehensive report. And actually, the findings of the CSIS report corroborate what we have been discussing with IFC. We have been conducting a participatory process of building guidelines together with IFC. And we were able to put together from private sectors, investors, to grassroots communities and leaders in the Amazon. And what we wanted to understand is what can we agree upon, what we need for sustainable infrastructure in the context of large scale projects. And we have been, the results in summary is we have to focus on planning and governance. And when we talk in the guidelines about planning, we are not just talking about very good project planning. The whole process of the project should be considering social and environmental issues from planning to implementation and monitoring. But in the guidelines, we are also talking about the systemic problems in the Amazon, and which is related to a good infrastructure national plan. And an infrastructure national plan is related to two things. One is to be related to the specificities of the territories. So what we are calling a territorial approach for infrastructure. So we can have better results, we have to understand, and we have to respond for specific demands of the Amazonian territories. And second, the necessity of the infrastructure policies are connected to other policies, social policies, environmental policies, and especially regional development policies. Then if we have this sectoral coordination, we can actually yield sustainable development. In practice, what we have been seeing, and the guidelines show when we did a lot of case studies during the guidelines, is that on the one side, we are having what the scholars are calling infrastructure projects territorially blind. So projects that don't consider at all the territories which they are implementing. And then the results in terms of risks and in terms of yielding development are very poor. And on the other hand, especially in Brazil, infrastructure projects are being the substitutes of a development agenda in the country. So you have a territory hosting a hydropower plant, and this hydropower plant project becomes the epicenter of the concept of development in that area. And then you have the environmental impact assessment as the strategic planning for the area, and then you have social and environmental mitigation processes as replacing a strategic process of development. So we have this distortion of the whole idea of development planning, and infrastructure alone will not yield to social and environmental gains. We are actually seeing exacerbating inequalities and deforestation. So I think the planning idea of the guidelines are very striking for going forward.
So Daniela, it seems to me that there's going to be some infrastructure development in the Amazon. It's largely inevitable. So how do we talk about this in this report, we talk about this in the country case studies, but in your mind, you work on this issue every day of the week. What needs to happen for this development to be done? What needs to happen?
Yeah, we have been working for 15 years in the field. We had the opportunity to realize applied research and interventions in hydropower plant of Belo Monte, in Madeira River, in the biggest mining plants in Brazil. And right now we are conducting a project on territorial governance in the area of a federal road crossing 800 kilometers of rainforest in the Amazon, the heart of Amazonas. So in the field, when we are working in these projects and understanding how we cannot tackle these underlying issues of governance and planning, we see two main challenges. The first one is in the local level. In the local level, what we see is that we have to strengthen capacity and participation. And strengthening capacities doesn't mean only strengthening local government capacities. This is something that is very usual. We think, the local governments, they are EU prepared. The reality is that the federal government is EU prepared. The investors are EU prepared. The private sector are EU prepared to tackle with the needed participation, dialogue, and cooperation. So this is one thing. The other thing is strengthening participatory processes. And participation is not only an universal right or a moral compass that we should follow, but it's also very effective for minimizing risks for investors and for implementation of infrastructure. This is something that we have been discussing a lot with IFC itself when we were doing the guidelines. And the other thing is not at the local level, but at the national level. If we need to tackle a good, strong governance, and the CSIS report talks a lot about it, yeah, we need coordination between state and society, which means more participation, and between state itself. The different sectors in the state, in the government needs to be coordinated. And for this, we need strong institutions within the government, which means we need strong institutions within the government that has the mandate of social protection, of environmental protection of indigenous and communities' rights. These they have to be working together, although they have conflicts, they have to be working together, making counterbalance with the more hegemonic economic institutions within the government. So we believe the main challenges now, especially in Brazil, is to guarantee that we have strong institutions, both in the infrastructure and economic sector, but also in the social and environmental protection sector, to be able to have this quality of governance that the CSIS report recommends and prescribes.
Thank you, Daniela. Juan Cruz, thank you for being with us. I'm so grateful you've been a senior advisor at CSIS. I'm grateful for your friendship, and I'm grateful that you're a colleague of mine. You have had a fabulous career in public service in the United States. You know the region really, really well. You actually got a master's degree in Brazil. You speak Portuguese, which is I'm quite envious of, because one of my life goals is to learn Portuguese. And so could you talk about, and you understand issues of security and military and police. I think this is a misunderstood dimension of the challenge in the Amazon is this, and this was something the report helped kind of bring out. Could you just talk about the role of the military and police in the Amazon, and why is there a security, why is the looking at the Amazon challenge through a security lens, why is that important, Juan?
Good morning, Dan, and I'll join those voices today that have congratulated your team, especially Romina and Shannon, over this impressive report. I'd like to add that the depth of research, so not everyone's going to appreciate, but having known, you've cited a lot of the hard work that went into this, but I'd even say, having been, a person who's been involved in the project throughout the year, the privilege of having seen some of the material as it was evolving, I'll point out a few things. One is the amount of material that ended up on the cutting room floor. That also gives you an indication of sort of the strength of this report, and that it's and for those who haven't had the chance to read it yet or in detail, the rich data that it leaves you. I mean, it leaves you with the thirst of wanting to learn more. So I think that makes it even a more successful report. I thought it was important to point that out. Now, going to your question, the challenges in the region are multiple and approached in a different way, not only by the different countries involved, but their security forces. And the first thing I would say is there is a grave lack of presence of state in these areas for the most part, and oftentimes the state ends up being represented by the security forces, the military, and the police, which tend to be the ones that are in these remote areas, because as Romina's pointed out, study underscores the fact that the lack of healthcare and education and issues of electricity is often not off of the national power grid, and these other challenges that we live in these areas also are reflected in the presence of the military and security in these regions. And what do I mean by that? I mean, well, first of all, the issue of transportation, a grave challenge that we've already heard in the report from several of the interlocutors. Transportation is acute. Transportation issues are acute, and just to give it shed a light on one of the countries, Peru, where you have a country, we normally associate Peru as being an Andean nation. Of course it is, but most of its territory is actually Amazon, which is kind of a nice, interesting surprise. But when you look at a country that I think it's about 60% of the country is Amazon jungle, and then you lay on top of that the issue that a huge country, 3 times the size of California, and yet it has fewer roads than Rhode Island. I think that sheds an interesting light on the value of transportation and the acute need. So the way you get around a lot of these regions are, of course, by air and by water. And in terms of infrastructure dedication, there's a great opportunity, I would see, in the development of the river ports, riverways, and other infrastructure associated with that. It's an alternate view of transportation. Not all transportation's building a road and scarring the Amazon while you do it. And so there are other ways to look at this. And yes, we're hostage to the rainy season and the dry season and what that means. But quite honestly, people have been dealing with that for centuries in that region. So I just throw that out because that is one of the really big issues for the security forces. Normally, you're not sufficiently well resourced. And then when you are, you don't have the array necessary, whether it's boats to navigate the multiple waterways and interconnectivity in this region, or the helicopters and all the other infrastructure that goes with that. And what are they doing? Well, each country has a different approach to of the three countries that we're talking about have a different approach. Historically, Brazil is part of the military's doctrine that Brazil owes the exploration of its territory to the Brazilian military that went out and forged and was responsible for plotting out and surveying what exactly Brazil was. And so that's a big part of the military and the security's DNA. And of course, let's not forget that Brazil's security forces are charged with protecting not only the Amazon, its territoriality, but whatever riches could come out of the Amazon. What I mean is we all understand that there's so many things yet to be explored about, who knows if the next cure for cancer comes out of the Amazon, right? There's a huge responsibility to that potential, and the Brazilians want to be good custodians of that. And so that's something that you wouldn't normally, that you don't see entirely in every country that owns a piece of the Amazon. It's an interesting onus and responsibility that the Brazilians have taken on. In other parts, as Romina pointed out, the Colombians have done a very interesting job of the whole. I would call it whole of society. It's not just whole of government because it includes those sectors that we get into in this report, which is like the private sector and others who have a role. And when you're trying to get a handle on exactly what's out there and how to provide for the protection against illegal logging, illegal mining, the trafficking in illegal trafficking of flora and fauna, and all those things that is what we're trying to get at here. I think that you'll find that not every country has the same kind of resources, attention, and responsibility. But I do believe, I'm a little optimistic. I think all the trends are in the right direction. But how do we provide an accelerant for that? Romina's point, I thought was interesting on the Leticia pact or plan. What could that look like if we did something like that focused on the security piece, right? Because there's so much that the services have learned in each part of their country that if they work together and they cross-pollinated and they shared best practices, lessons learned, and even maybe some joint efforts, we would get some really interesting ways so that it might be a million miles away for the Brazilians for an area that might be really much closer to the Colombians or the Peruvians, for example. And while there are signs and there have been examples of cooperation, they're not part of a strategy, and there hasn't been enough of it. I think what we do is we take good examples and we make them better, and we proliferate those good concepts. So I think I'll stop there in response to your question.
Love that idea. I think we had a return to that. That is a fabulous idea. So I got a question. I'd ask for a short 60-second answer for each of you. Each of you gets a different question. So Daniela, what is the role of the private sector to ensure private sector development in the Amazon, given sort of your work with IFC? What's the role of the private sector? Tomas, what is your message when I go and talk to ministers in the countries in the Amazon basin? What is your message about planning and infrastructure that we need to deliver as CSIS? What's the short bumper sticker message on infrastructure? And then Juan, we have an election next week. I don't know if anyone's heard about this, but there's this election in the United States next week. It doesn't really matter who wins. In my mind, what role could the United States play, Juan? What constructive role could the United States play? I've got my views about it, but I'd welcome your thoughts. So 60 seconds for each of you. Let me start with Daniela. Role of the private sector and the future of the Amazon. Daniela.
Well, I think we've learned with IFC. IFC, when they approached us, they said, you know, we are doing everything right. We have these performance standards. We are doing the best possible projects, and we are not delivering what we are looking for, which is sustainable development and social cohesion and environmental protection. And during the process of the guidelines and all our work together, we are saying, get on board. And IFC was saying, you know, private sector, get on board on dialogue, get on board on coordination, get on board on talking beyond compliance. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, because we have to work together with this broader idea of a territorial approach in terms of infrastructure. I would say that.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Tomas, when we're going to go talk to all these ministries, what's our meta message on infrastructure? What do we be how do we engage our friends? What's your takeaway?
Know that infrastructure is absolutely necessary for development, but you need to plan well to pick the right projects. Those are the projects that will allow to have, realize the potential, the development plans, to avoid conflicts that are common. And then we have to be open to new dimensions one that hasn't been mentioned or highlighted here is technology. Technology is shaking the way we plan infrastructure. Probably for electricity, you won't need those huge hydro plants. You will need, distributed energy. So we have to be open. Regulatory agencies have to be open to technology, to bring private sector, to have sandboxes in places. So, but this is an optimistic view. Technology can help us.
I love this. Thank you, Tomas. Okay, Juan Cruz, doesn't matter who gets elected next week. What constructive role could the United States play regardless of what happens next week in our election?
Well, I like the use of constructive, right? Because I think that we've often gotten it wrong. Us and others in the world have gotten it wrong, creating a sort of a reaction from the Brazilians. Sometimes we've created in them sort of weariness. And so we have an obligation and responsibility to treat people with respect. I think we have to avoid heavy-handed tactics and proselytizing or finger wagging. I think what we need to do is find partnerships. I think what we need to do is to find an approach where we throw an arm around the Brazilians, and we talk about what CSIS has done today. Place the emphasis on all those important issues: the economy, security, economic development, and the environment. And so it's not, the environment. It's all those issues that are tied in one with the other, and the environment comes along in the whole bundle.
Thanks, Juan. Daniela, can I bring you into this? So we're going to have an election in the United States next week. We in the United States don't live in the Amazon. The residents of the eight or nine countries of the 8 countries of the Amazon basin do. I'd like to think there's a role for the international community. What's an appropriate role for the United States? To tell us how could we be constructive and useful in this conversation as opposed to unhelpful?
Well, I think since our current government is looking a lot at the United States as a mentor and as a model, I think United States could play a big role in explaining and pressing Brazilian government in a good way, in a constructive way, to see social and environmental standards, social, environmental, and security concerns is related to a broader diversity in the area in respect to local populations. I mean, United States can play a big role sending a very clear message that there is no way different from that, from respecting the social and environmental concerns. This is the only way for economic growth in Brazil and in the Brazilian Amazon. So I would say there is a place in the United States for saying this.
Well, last thing, I'm so appreciative that we have you, Daniela. OECD membership. I just authored an article in The Hill last week about, regardless of the US election, I would argue it's in the American interest to have Brazil become a member of the OECD. It's one of the most prestigious clubs in the world for countries. This government in Brazil wants to become a member of the OECD. Colombia and Costa Rica have recently become members, and they took on some very hard choices and spent political capital in their countries, in their political system, to make certain kind of changes to become a member of the OECD. What do you think about this idea about leveraging and using in a constructive way, engaging Brazil as it goes through the OECD process on issues around infrastructure in the Amazon?
I think it's an opportunity if we create some conditionalities about that. Conditionalities in terms of strengthening government and non-government institutions, highlighting protection of social standards and environmental standards. I think it's an opportunity if OECD is capable to have a broader vision of economic development in developing countries, and especially in Brazil, considering the Amazon an asset in terms of an opportunity for growth, but in a different way of the industrial policy and infrastructure policy that we have been repeating in Brazil for centuries now. So that's it.
Thanks, Juan. Thanks, Tomas. Thank you, Daniela. Obviously, we're grateful to you. Congratulations, Romina and Shannon. This is a great report. I encourage everyone to go out and read it. We're looking forward to engaging all of our partners in governments on this report and in civil society. Please go check out the report. It's at our CSIS website. Congratulations again. Thanks again. And that ends our presentation and our conference today. Thank you very much.